8 years in federal prison, 12 years for the other one. My entire family destroyed. 47 families lost everything they'd built over generations. And it all started because I sent one email at 11:47 p.m. when I was 14 years old. They signed the marriage contract while I sat on my bed, clutching Mr. Buttons, my stuffed bear with his missing left eye. The sounds drifted up through the heating vents. My father's deep voice, my uncle's negotiations, the scratch of pen on paper. Was I wrong to destroy my family's honor, to save my own life? Or was silence the real surrender? I was 14 when my father made the announcement. Thursday dinner. His tone flat, final. You will marry Tariq Khalil before your 15th birthday. Tariq was 31, 17 years older than me, a distant cousin I'd met twice. Once at a funeral when I was 9, once at a family gathering where he'd stared at me, making my skin crawl. In our culture, arranged marriages are common. Parents choose spouses for their children, believing they know what's best. But I was 14, still a child. He's a good man from a good family, my father said. He owns a successful electronics repair business. He will provide stability. I asked what would happen if I refused. My father's hand slammed the table, hard enough to rattle dishes, send the salt shaker toppling. The sudden violence shocked me into silence. This man who'd never raised his hand to me in anger. This isn't a negotiation, Amira. You will do as you're told. Your duty to this family is not optional. Something bothered me about Tariq's shop. Every time we drove past, the windows were dark, the closed sign hanging askew, weeds growing through sidewalk cracks. What kind of successful business stayed closed all the time? I filed this detail away, not knowing it would later become crucial evidence. The pressure began immediately. My grandmother arrived with fabric samples, burgundy silk, cream lace, golden thread. Beautiful materials spread across our kitchen table like she was planning a celebration, not what felt to me like a funeral. When I tried to leave, she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. You should be grateful, she said in accented English. Girls like you don't get many opportunities. Your sister Layla made choices that damaged our family's reputation in the community. This marriage will restore what was lost. This was the first time anyone explained why I was being sacrificed. My older sister had defied our parents 3 years earlier, choosing college over an arranged marriage. Her rebellion had caused whispers, damaged relationships, made our family seem unreliable. I was being sold to repair someone else's mistake. I tried to find allies, starting with my mother. She listened with folded hands, her expression caught between pity and resignation. I understand how you feel, she said gently. I was married at 16 myself. I cried for weeks before my wedding, begged my own mother to let me wait. I asked if she'd ever been happy in her marriage. She looked at me for a long moment. Happiness isn't the point, Habibti. Security is the point. Family is the point. Personal feelings are luxuries we can't always afford. Her words felt like doors closing, like locks turning. Desperate, I called my sister Layla 3 hours away, begging her to intervene. The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Amira, she said carefully, I can't afford to antagonize them again. It took me 3 years to rebuild after I left. 3 years of working 2 jobs while finishing school. 3 years of sleeping on friends' couches because I couldn't ask for help. I barely survived my own rebellion. Her voice carried exhaustion from old battles. You need to be smarter than I was. Find another way. Don't make it a direct confrontation. But what way? I was 14, powerless, surrounded by adults who decided my fate. The isolation was suffocating. No one would risk their position to protect mine. Wedding preparations accelerated through February like a machine I couldn't stop. Our house became a staging ground for an event that felt like my execution. Relatives I barely knew arrived for daily planning sessions, their voices filling our living room with discussions of flowers and music, treating this like a celebration rather than what it felt to me, the end of my childhood. Tariq came twice a week with his mother, a small woman with sharp eyes who examined me like livestock at market. She checked my posture, my complexion, the way I poured tea. These visits were exercises in humiliation, disguised as courtship. I was being auditioned for a role I'd never wanted in a play that would last the rest of my life. Tariq spoke to me directly only once, during our third meeting. "Do you know how to cook traditional dishes?" he asked, his voice carrying casual authority. I gave the coach response, "I'm still learning. My mother is teaching me." His mother made a dismissive sound. "I hope you'll be more competent as a wife than you seem to be as a daughter." The casual cruelty hit like a slap. This was my future. Years of small humiliations, constant evaluation, existing primarily to serve other people's needs. By March, I started noticing disturbing patterns. Tariq's shop, still never open. My father and Tariq's father having intense private conversations in our backyard, speaking in hushed tones. Money changing hands in thick envelopes. Not like traditional dowry payments, but like urgent business transactions. The conversations always ended with handshakes that looked more like deals being finalized than family relationships being celebrated. Something was very wrong, but I was too young to understand what. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon that changed everything. Tariq arrived alone, without his mother, for the first time since the engagement began. My parents suddenly discovered urgent errands that would keep them away for exactly 1 hour. The timing felt orchestrated, strategic, planned. He moved immediately to sit beside me on the couch, close enough that his leg pressed against mine through my jeans. The contact was deliberate, invasive, designed to test boundaries and establish dominance. "I'm looking forward to teaching you how to be a proper wife," he said, his voice lower, more intimate than during supervised visits. His hand moved to my knee. I tried to shift away, but he'd positioned himself to make escape impossible without obvious confrontation. "You need to start learning obedience now," he continued, his grip tightening just enough to communicate control. "I don't tolerate disrespect. I won't have a wife who embarrasses me by acting like a spoiled American girl instead of a proper Muslim woman." Each word was chosen for maximum impact, positioning my resistance as character failure, my desire for autonomy as cultural contamination. When I finally found courage to pull away and stand up, his reaction revealed his true nature. His expression shifted from patronizing amusement to calculating coldness. "Don't touch me," I said, louder than intended, but carrying conviction that surprised us both. He leaned back, relaxed, as if my defiance was entertaining. "Your father warned me you had a rebellious streak. He told me you'd been influenced by American ideas about independence. But don't worry, I know how to handle that. I've broken horses that were much more stubborn than you are." The comparison was deliberate and dehumanizing. He saw me not as a person, but as an animal needing training. "I'll see you at dinner Tuesday," he said, standing and straightening his jacket with casual efficiency. "Try to work on your attitude before then. Remember, your father has already given his word. There's no going back now." He left 10 minutes later. I sat alone in that living room, shaking with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The afternoon light slanted through our windows, illuminating family photos, birthday parties, school plays, Christmas mornings, evidence of a childhood that was ending whether I wanted it to or not. But sitting there, I realized something that changed everything. If I went through with this marriage, I wouldn't survive it, not as the person I was meant to become. Some essential part of me would die under his training and breaking and reshaping. What if I hadn't sent that email? Let me paint you Timeline B, the life I would have lived. I'd be 25 now, married for 11 years to a man whose touches I would have learned to endure rather than enjoy, my body worn down by pregnancy and childbirth before I was old enough to understand what I was sacrificing. I'd probably have 3 or 4 children by now, little versions of Tariq, who would depend on me while I depended on their father for everything. I would have become expert at reading his moods, anticipating his needs, managing his temper, with the skill of someone whose survival depended on keeping another person satisfied. The house would have been decorated according to his preferences, organized around his schedule, managed according to his standards. I might have found contentment in that smaller life, a kind word when I pleased him, successful dinner parties that reflected his status, the security of knowing exactly what was expected. But the curious girl who loved books and dreamed of college, that girl would have been buried alive. Some essential part of me would have died. But I chose Timeline A. I chose to fight. That night, sitting in my bedroom with Mr. Buttons and my laptop, I made the decision that would save my life and destroy everything else. It was Sunday, March 11 p.m. The house was quiet, dishwasher running, TV murmuring, my parents' footsteps on the stairs. I'd found a guidance counselor's email on a flyer about resources for students facing difficult situations. The cursor blinked in the subject line like a heartbeat, marking seconds until I either acted or accepted the future that had been chosen for me. How do you compress 14 years of life into an email? I started with the most basic fact. I'm 14 years old. 2 words that had to carry everything. That I still slept with a stuffed animal. That I'd never been kissed by someone I chose. That I was years away from understanding love or partnership. The words poured out like confession. I wrote about the marriage arrangement, Tariq's age, my terror, about that afternoon when he'd grabbed my knee and compared me to livestock needing breaking, about my mother's resignation, my sister's abandonment, the community pressure that made my feelings irrelevant to decisions about my body and future. I ended with the simplest truth. I'm afraid. Fear was universal. Fear was something any adult should recognize and respond to. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. The soft whoosh sound felt like jumping off a cliff, like lighting a fuse on an explosive device. Message sent. 2 words that would change dozens of lives forever. The response came the next morning during 3rd period biology. Mrs. Patterson called my name, asked me to gather my things. My heart raced. Had my parents discovered my betrayal? Instead, she led me to a conference room where 2 women in professional clothes waited with folders and expressions of calm authority. Hello, Amira. I'm Sarah Chen, and this is Maria Santos. We're from Child Protective Services. We received your email, and we need to ask you some questions. The words Child Protective Services hit like a physical blow. Not because I regretted reaching out, but because hearing official response made everything real. Someone had read my desperate plea. Someone had taken it seriously. They asked me to tell them everything. I did, haltingly at first, then in a flood of words and tears. The marriage contract, Tariq's behavior, my family's threats, my mother's gentle but immovable belief that happiness was a luxury. my father's anger when I had questioned his authority. When I finished, Sarah Chen looked at me with eyes that had clearly seen too much but hadn't lost their capacity for outrage. What your family is planning is illegal, Amira. Forced marriage of a minor is child abuse under state law, regardless of cultural or religious justifications. We're going to intervene immediately. The word illegal rang like a bell. Vindication I hadn't dared hope for. All those weeks of being told I was ungrateful, and it turned out what they were planning actually violated American law. We're also curious about something you mentioned, Maria Santos added. This electronics repair business that's always closed. We've contacted federal agencies that investigate financial crimes. They're very interested. At the time, I thought this was routine background checking. I had no idea that my casual observation would unravel a criminal network that had been operating for years. I didn't go home that afternoon. Instead, CPS placed me with the Johnson family, people who had opened their home to children in crisis. That first night in a bedroom, with purple walls and flower curtains, everything clean and bright and normal, felt surreal after months of living under the weight of an unwanted future. My parents called 17 times. I finally asked Linda Johnson to turn off the ringer, unable to bear my mother's increasingly frantic voicemails that alternated between pleading and threats. The voicemail my father left around midnight sealed my resolve. You've destroyed everything, Amira. Destroyed the family, brought shame on all of us, ruined relationships that took decades to build. Come home immediately and we'll tell them you were confused, that this was all a misunderstanding. But if you continue with this betrayal, there will be no coming back. You'll have no family, no community, no support when the world turns against you. I saved that voicemail and forwarded it to Sarah Chen with a simple text. Is this normal? Her response came within minutes. No, it's not normal, and it's exactly the kind of coercion we're here to protect you from. You did the right thing. Those words, you did the right thing, were the first time in months an adult had validated my instincts instead of dismissing them. The legal machinery moved with surprising speed. Within a week, emergency custody petition, restraining order, broader investigation. What started as my individual case became something larger. Examination of other families, other potential forced marriages, patterns of coercion within our immigrant community. Social workers interviewed my cousins, friends from mosque, other teenage girls whose parents might have made similar arrangements. The questions were gentle but thorough. How old were you when marriage was first discussed? Did you have input into spouse selection? Were you threatened with consequences for refusing? Some answers must have been troubling, because by March's end, the investigation included federal agents specializing in financial crimes and human trafficking cases. Then came the day that changed everything. Federal agents raided Tariq's electronics shop on a Tuesday morning in April. Search warrants, financial investigators, comprehensive evidence seizure. What I'd observed as a mysterious detail, the perpetually closed business, became the thread that unraveled everything. The shop wasn't a repair business at all. It was a front for wire fraud and money laundering, and my father was deeply involved. The Hawala system they uncovered was ancient, a traditional money transfer network that had served immigrant communities for centuries. In many parts of the world, these systems provide essential services for people who need to send money across borders quickly and affordably, especially where banking infrastructure is limited or unreliable. But in the United States, operating unlicensed money services is a federal crime. The network Tariq and my father had been running processed over $15 million in 3 years without federal oversight, documentation, or tax reporting. This explained everything I'd observed: the private backyard conversations, the envelope exchanges, the urgency around my engagement. My marriage wasn't just about family honor. It was about cementing a business partnership between families whose financial operations were so intertwined they needed legal kinship for additional security. The dowry wasn't traditional ceremony, it was money laundering. I wasn't just being married off to repair my sister's reputation damage. I was collateral in arrangements requiring absolute loyalty from everyone who knew about them. My father was arrested at his construction office on a Thursday afternoon. The call came from Sarah Chen. "Your father has been taken into custody. He's charged with conspiracy to operate unlicensed money services, wire fraud, and money laundering." The news should have felt like vindication, proof my instincts were correct. Instead, it felt like watching a building collapse, devastating and inevitable and somehow anticlimactic. My father, who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and helped with math homework, was now a federal criminal facing decades in prison for activities I'd never suspected. Tariq was arrested the same day, along with 19 other network operators. The coordinated takedown suggested months of surveillance and financial analysis. The scope was staggering: tentacles reaching 6 countries, connections to import businesses and construction companies, the kind of cash-intensive enterprises that form immigrant communities' economic backbone. Media coverage began within hours. Local news teams set up outside our mosque and community center, turning our neighborhood into a spectacle of cultural difference and criminal activity. Headlines wrote themselves: "Local marriage arrangement uncovers $1 million money laundering ring." I was described as a brave young woman who had exposed criminal activity, language that made me sound heroic when I felt anything but brave. The community I'd grown up in was being torn apart by investigations that started with my desperate email. But 3 years later, during college sociology courses, I learned something that still haunts me. The Hawala system wasn't just criminal enterprise, it was a lifeline for dozens of families. A centuries-old institution serving people who couldn't access traditional banking because of language barriers, documentation issues, or simple economics. Official money transfers were expensive and slow. Hawala was affordable and fast. The system was built on trust, developed over generations, relationships between families stretching back to shared villages. It allowed restaurant owners to send money to elderly parents overseas, construction workers to support sisters' children, grocery store owners to invest in brothers' businesses abroad. The operators weren't motivated primarily by profit, but by obligation to serve community needs mainstream institutions couldn't meet. They were respected leaders whose word was sufficient guarantee for thousands of dollars, because betraying trust meant losing not just business, but social standing and family connections. When federal agents shut down the network, they eliminated more than illegal activity. They destroyed a social institution serving essential functions. 47 families lost access to reliable, affordable money transfers they'd used to support overseas relatives. 12 businesses closed when they could no longer access informal financing. 5 families were deported when investigations revealed immigration irregularities they'd been managing successfully until their Hawala connection brought federal attention. The consequences extended beyond immediate economics. The mosque where I'd attended Sunday school became a place of suspicion, people eyeing each other warily, wondering who might be cooperating with investigators. Attendance dropped by half, as families decided association risks outweighed collective worship benefits. The newspapers that celebrated dismantling what they called a criminal conspiracy never examined long-term consequences or explored human costs of enforcing banking regulations without providing alternatives for legitimate needs the system had served. My testimony didn't just send criminals to prison, it destroyed a financial network that dozens of families depended on for survival. The prosecutor called it justice. The community calls me a traitor. My father, 8 years. Tariq, 12 years. But 47 families lost everything because of what I exposed. Was I still right? What if I'd known? If someone had explained that seeking help would destroy 47 families' economic lifelines? If I'd been forced to weigh my individual autonomy against collective welfare of people I'd never met, but who would bear the costs of my decision? Would I still have sent that email? The answer is yes, and that certainty disturbs me most. Even knowing everything I know now, that my email destroyed more than marriage plans, that my choice had collective costs I couldn't anticipate, I would still have sent it. I would still have chosen my autonomy over community harmony, my safety over others' financial needs, my individual rights over cultural obligations, requiring me to sacrifice my future for system stability. Maybe that makes me irredeemably selfish, contaminated by American ideas about individual rights that ignore community solidarity. Maybe it makes me ungrateful to people who'd created opportunities for families like mine. Maybe it makes me responsible not just for my liberation, but for hardships that liberation caused. Or maybe it makes me human, someone who recognized danger and acted to prevent it. My testimony in family court came in late April. Sitting in that witness chair felt like occupying the center of destruction I'd caused but couldn't control, couldn't limit, to only people willing to sacrifice my autonomy for their arrangements. The courtroom was smaller than expected, more conference room than dramatic setting, but emotional weight felt immense. My parents sat at the defense table, my father in his gray suit from school concerts, my mother in black dress making her look like she was attending a funeral rather than custody hearing. Questions began gently. Yes, I was 14 when marriage was arranged. Yes, I'd expressed reluctance. No, my concerns weren't taken seriously. Yes, I'd been told compliance wasn't optional. My father's attorney challenged my testimony, suggesting I'd misunderstood cultural practices I was too young to appreciate, that my resistance reflected American educational influences, promoting individualistic values incompatible with traditional family relationships. Isn't it possible, he asked carefully, that you were upset about normal parental expectations, about parents making important decisions based on experience children don't yet possess? The question hung loaded with implications about cultural relativism and generational authority. This was the moment when everything would be distilled into a single response, validating or dismissing my experience. I looked at my father, saw pain, disappointment, desperate hope. He genuinely believed he'd been acting in my best interests, even while prepared to eliminate my agency for business arrangements and community standing. Normal parents don't sell their daughters, I said, words emerging steadier than expected. Normal parents don't arrange marriages for 14-year-olds who are afraid. Normal parents don't ignore their children's terror and call it disobedience. Normal parents don't threaten their children for asking for help when they feel unsafe. The courtroom fell completely silent. The defense attorney sat down without further questions. The judge's expression had hardened during my testimony. She'd heard enough to reach conclusions about parents claiming to love their daughter while planning to eliminate her meaningful choice about her future. The verdicts came in September, just before my 16th birthday. My father, 8 years federal prison. Tariq, 12 years. 17 others received sentences from probation to 10 years. The sentences were deliberately harsh, designed to send messages about legal compliance regardless of cultural traditions or community needs. The judge spoke about protecting children from forced marriage, about immigrant communities needing to follow American regulations despite practical hardships those regulations imposed. Watching my father led away in handcuffs while my mother sobbed, I felt vindicated and guilty simultaneously. Certain I'd made the right choice for myself, while recognizing it imposed costs others hadn't chosen to pay. I spent my 16th birthday at the Johnson house. Chocolate cake, thoughtful presents, genuine celebration. The contrast was sharp. Exactly 1 year earlier, I'd been clutching Mr. Buttons while marriage contracts were signed below. College provided crucial perspective. Sociology classes about gender, culture, immigration, economics courses on informal financial networks, political science exploring tension between individual rights and collective obligations. Each framework helped me understand my experience as part of larger conflict patterns rather than unique personal crisis. I volunteered with organizations helping young people navigate similar family conflicts. The work was fulfilling and heartbreaking, meeting teenagers facing versions of the same impossible choices. Some found compromises preserving family relationships while protecting autonomy. Others, like me, were forced to choose between safety and community connections. I testified at 2 more trials during college, cases involving other families where forced marriages were uncovered during ongoing federal investigations that grew from my initial report. Each time felt weighty, being simultaneously expert and victim, speaking authoritatively while personally invested in outcomes. I was invited to congressional hearings during senior year, panels examining federal responses to forced marriage. The hearing was nationally broadcast, generating policy-focused coverage rather than individual drama. Now, at 25, I work for legal aid organizations serving immigrant communities. I help families navigate tensions between cultural preservation and legal compliance, while protecting individual rights and maintaining community solidarity. I've built an authentic life impossible if I'd accepted that marriage, but I carry on going awareness that my liberation came at collective cost, affecting dozens of families who hadn't chosen to be part of my story. The question shaping my work isn't whether I'd make the same choice again. I would, that survival requires prioritizing immediate safety over potential consequences. The important question is what I do with the life that choice made possible. This involves supporting policies, providing alternatives to enforcement-only approaches, advocating for community mediation programs, helping families negotiate solutions, protecting vulnerable members while preserving relationships, pushing for immigration policies, recognizing immigrant experience complexity rather than treating cultural differences as problems requiring elimination. Sometimes I wonder what might have been possible with more sophisticated systems, social services, including people understanding our culture, banking regulations providing pathways for formalizing traditional networks rather than criminalizing them, law enforcement distinguishing criminal enterprises from community institutions serving legitimate functions. The most important lesson: individual choices and collective consequences are inevitably intertwined unpredictably, but that doesn't eliminate the moral necessity of choosing safety when survival is at stake. So what's the verdict? Was I justified sending that email destroying my family's plans and triggering investigations, eliminating financial networks dozens of families depended on? Was I unfair prioritizing individual safety over collective welfare? Did I save myself or destroy innocence? I could tell you what I think after more than a decade living with these questions, studying their implications, working to address similar conflicts. I could explain reasoning processes allowing me to build meaningful life despite unintended consequences. Wait, but the moment I do, this case closes in your mind. You'll align with my conclusions or reject them. Either way, the conversation ends, complexity gets reduced to simple right-wrong categories, and ongoing work, creating better solutions, becomes someone else's responsibility. If I leave it open, you'll carry these questions. You'll think about the 14-year-old clutching her teddy bear and the 47 families who lost their economic lifelines. You'll wrestle with impossible calculus of choosing who deserves protection when protecting some requires sacrificing others. Maybe that discomfort translates into support for policies creating more options, more flexibility, more ways of protecting individuals without destroying communities serving essential needs. The truth is, the most important questions don't have clean answers. They have consequences teaching us long after initial choices. They challenge us to build better systems, develop nuanced approaches, recognize that justice work is never finished, never perfect, never simple enough for closure categories. The questions remain open, evolving, demanding better responses than we've created. They require imagining systems, protecting vulnerable people without destroying communities, serving individual rights and collective responsibilities simultaneously. So here's my verdict. There is no verdict. Only questions getting more complex the longer you think about them. And those questions, all of them, are yours to answer. Jury, leave your verdict below. Verdict, justified, or verdict, unfair. Subscribe to join the jury. Tomorrow, another case awaits your judgment.